Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to the first GOTUG webinar of 2022. For this webinar, we have something a little different than a normal show and tell. The webinar is going to be a panel discussion with a few GIS-related project managers and employees from state DOTs. We will be discussing how online GIS tools are created and maintained and how they are implemented in the public sector transportation organization. Before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to first go into who we are and what we do. GOTUG is an AASHTO-sponsored user group. Is the Geospatial Online Transportation User Group. It began as a U-Plan initiative back in September 2015, and user group was created in 2016 as a response to the rapidly increasing pace of development of web-based GIS tools and applications. Our goals are to bring transportation professionals, GIS, and engineering disciplines together to focus on the use of web-based GIS tools amongst transportation planning, engineering, and GIS professionals, and also to provide a forum to exchange ideas about the future of web-based geospatial tools and transportation. The key people are myself, Jeremy Aycock. I'm a web GIS specialist at North Carolina DOT, and Kyla Elzinga, who is a associate program manager at AASHTO. We also have some steering committee members: Nicole Hansen with the Idaho Transportation Department, Mark Sarmiento with the Federal Highway Administration, and Andrew Wimsatt with the Texas Transportation Institute. Speaking of committee members, we're actually looking for a few new committee members. We've lost a few to positional changes over the last couple of years. If you work with online-based GIS with a government-based transportation agency and would like to participate in monthly discussions with peers from other parts of the country, please reach out to us. We're a pretty casual group, and it's a pretty easy time commitment, so we'd love to have you. So without let's see. A couple of things more about us. We provide a platform for DOTs and business partners to showcase implementation of web-based GIS tools to meet business needs. We do webinars that focus on project planning, infrastructure maintenance, asset management, environmental compliance, traffic operations, project delivery, as well as other things. Just want to know that we do not endorse any branded products. A couple of links, helpful links to our website. This is where we keep all of our past webinars, as well as information about our members. Here are some other technical resource links to our website, to our distribution list. If you'd like to join our distribution list, click the link, or you can go to that website. And you can also sign up for some information concerning our webinars through a bulletin at gotug@transportation.org. These community resources increase the visibility of GIS and geospatial data issues and provide a technical resource group for all AASHTO members. Here's some other resources: MPO GIS Working Group website. You don't need to be a member to participate in this group, and they also have a list of their webinars on that webpage. And then the Federal Highways Administration and GIS program, or transportation program, contains GIS-focused case study reports, peer exchange summary reports, email, news briefs, and webinars. Our next GOTUG webinar after this will be on March 2nd, 2022. If you have any cool, things concerning online GIS and transportation, please contact us, and we'd like to share what you have. So without further ado, let's begin our panel discussion. Just a reminder, if you have any questions for the panelists at any time, you can enter them at the chat window, and Kyla will relay them to our panel. With me, I have three panelists: Eric Wilson, who was instrumental in developing NCDOT's Atlas Online tool, which is a one-stop GIS data repository for all layers involved with transportation planning with North Carolina. This tool improves business processes and provides data access for storage framework to support informed project development. He is settling in as new manager of the GIS department at North Carolina DOT, where he oversees a staff of 40 analysts and developers, including myself. We also have Jason Robinson, an assistant director of Virginia DOT's Infrastructure Investment Division. He oversees a SMART portal, which supports the smart scale project prioritization process, as well as hosts of additional application-based funding processes. He's also involved with Pathways for Planning application, which is a GIS application that includes data pertaining to congestion, safety, etc. We're reviewing Virginia's statewide transportation needs, existing projects, underway and completed studies, etc. These applications and tools help inform project recommendations that drive the SMART portal process. We also have Will Thurman, who is a GIS analyst with the Idaho Transportation Department. He works chiefly with data integration and application development and is dedicated to helping others leveraging geospatial tools and automation to empower Idaho transportation employees and reduce the dependence on manual processes and data silos. So let's start with you guys giving a little background about the APRA tool that we're kind of framing this discussion with, and how does it work and how are you involved in creating it? Eric, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. My role at the time was the Atlas project technical lead. So my role was to oversee a large amount of consultants and also NCDOT and NCDIT staff in the effort to create a web-based interface to GIS data that describes information that's delivered as part of project delivery, and also to create a series of applications to better evaluate potential project areas, whether it's a study area or a corridor that's going to be developed. So if you think of a road project and they're trying to figure out what impacts will happen in that particular road corridor that's going to be possibly modified, the Atlas project essentially has a search tool which allows you to find any data that may or may not be in that area. It has a screening tool which allows you to basically evaluate the study area to see if you're going to impact anything from a particular type of fish or trout to whether you're going to impact the human environment, and provide you summary reporting out of that tool when you run it. And then finally, there's a workbench tool. So as you're going through the project delivery process and you're submitting your various reports that are for federal or state permitting, we capture the report as PDF deliverables and also the associated GIS data. That entire process we automated and provided a front end to. Those were our three public-facing tools: the search tool, the screening tool, and the workbench. And then we have an administrative tool that we built that basically lets you configure all those items from the business side. And my role at this point as a GIS manager, I'm still kind of overseeing the Atlas project. And our role at this point is O&M to help the thing stay afloat and to provide technical resources and modifications to the application as the business desires moving forward. So that's my role.
All right, thanks a lot. Jason, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Robinson. As Jeremy mentioned, I'm with VDOT. Primarily going to be talking about our SMART portal for this discussion. I've had about 12 years at VDOT, and oh, thank you, Jeremy. 12 years at VDOT, both in one of our field offices and our central office in Richmond. I first became involved with the SMART portal back in 2014. Our HB2 project prioritization process started in 2014 and later became what we now call Smart Scale. That the SMART portal that we use to support application intake for that process began at that time just to support Smart Scale. And as you can see on my screen, over the last 7 years, we've added a number of other funding programs in our capital construction program to the SMART portal that are all GIS-based funding application intake mechanisms. And these all feed our 6-year improvement program. Once I moved to our central office and joined our infrastructure investment division, in my role now, I'm the product owner for the SMART portal. I work with about 4 to 5 of our central office divisions. I work with the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, which is a segment of our secretary's office that oversees the Smart Scale process and conducts multimodal planning across the state. To kind of make all this work together, we have discrete intake processes for all of our funding application programs. each year, and it requires a lot of coordination between different elements across the department to make them all work. So my role in that is making sure the portal works, working with our third-party vendor that supports it, working with our IT division, working with all the special program managers that have kind of a program that they oversee within this portal, and making sure that we have a quality product that we're allowing our local governments and MPOs, PDCs, and transit providers to be able to access to apply for funding in our program. It's kind of a
Hey, Jason, I think we lost you on your microphone.
Yeah, I can't hear him either.
Okay. Let's see. I think maybe we can move on to Will for a minute and see if Jason come back with his microphone.
All right. All right. So yeah, I'm Will Thoman. I'm a GIS analyst at the Idaho Transportation Department, and I will be talking a little bit about our iPlan, which is our branded deployment of ArcGIS Online. And there we go. And specifically focusing on one application within that was a fairly potent public information tool built around initially the traffic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, but then has become a very valuable tool in general for both the public and our internal organization. So focusing on this sort of broadly, but then that more as a specific example of something that worked pretty well and was a successful application that we developed within this broader framework.
All right. Thanks. So we'll just go ahead and get it started with some panel discussion. I have it presented in a format of 20 questions, and we're going to break them up into 3 different categories: development, implementation, and maintenance. So we'll get started with the first question. So in your experience, where does the decision to create an app or tool begin? You know, what kind of positions are involved in establishing the need for the tool or app? And you guys can just speak whenever you'd like.
Okay, I can go first. Oh, go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No,
Okay. All right. For us at DOT, when we came to the point where we were going to build the Atlas applications, it was actually something that was not an initial thought. When the Atlas program was initially started, it was primarily around creating data and capturing data as part of the project delivery process. And the business was not thinking applications. They were trying to think more in terms of older technology types, like using email or somehow, handling things through FTP. And we basically had to work through the problems with them that they were trying to accomplish. And at some point in there, we came to a conclusion that an application was the right route to go. And in our case, it took the form of 3 separate ones to make life easier and more understandable for the consumer. And that decision was made by the business, and we from the IT side were there to assist. And essentially the need was established by the business, and we did not do any salesmanship or anything like that trying to promote the idea of an application being built. We were simply there to offer recommendations when they kind of came to that conclusion out of the conversations.
Gotcha. How about you, Will?
I would agree entirely. It needs to come out of a business need, and necessarily I think also a close working relationship with the business. I agree that we don't want to reach out in terms of just pure salesmanship, but there needs to be an awareness of GIS within some of those business units and what we can do, because often they'll have needs. And the most successful cases we've had are when the business has a need and realizes that we might be able to meet that, and then we work with them to develop an app. But it needs to start with the business and sort of the business seeking it out, at least in my experience, because the other way around hasn't been as successful.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You bet.
I was just going to segue off what he said since I kind of stood on the business side. it's kind of gone both ways, where I've seen some of the things that the tool has been able to do for us has actually shaped our business decisions. First, it's a need, and then some things it's shown to us like, oh, we can also do this. Would this play a part in your process? And then we've actually changed processes based on, oh, well, this GIS application can actually, overlay things this way, and that helps us, be more efficient with other things that we're doing. So for us, it's definitely been very symbiotic and business need. And then the tool says, well, now we gave you a need you didn't even know you had. And it's helped us solve a lot of things that way.
All right, great. All right, next question. Who are the customers or the stakeholders for this tool or app?
I'll speak for Virginia. When we created the Smart Portal, it was based on us establishing a new funding process in Virginia that we mirrored a lot off North Carolina's prioritization process, actually, an objective metric-based evaluation process for capital projects in Virginia, very politically driven. Knew we needed to have an application to support scoring and metric analysis. And so it was, at first it was very much executive level management, but we kind of shifted gears in Virginia, where for years, for decades, frankly, the state had been the deciding body in what projects we were going to pursue, from planning to implementation. And then with our smart scale process, which this tool supports, we switch gears to local governments and MPOs, not just having a voice in which projects made it into our capital program, but actually putting forth the ideas for the projects. And so they became our primary stakeholders and customers. They're our major user base. And so we have over 100 localities in Virginia, 15 MPOs, 23 PDCs, a number of transit providers. Those are all our primary customer base, and they really drive how we do things.
Okay. Sounds good.
For us in North Carolina.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay,
right.
fine, I'll go.
Right.
So for the Idaho Transportation Department, and especially the iPlan tool, a lot of it is any stakeholders within the business, particularly for the tool I'm looking at, the traffics group we have, as well as the communications group. And typically those are some of the groups who I'd say are most bought into GIS at the organization and have really seen the potential and been willing to leverage that. And ultimately the customers for a lot of this are typically the public, as well as our sort of comms office being able to use this as a tool for public information instead of the prior method, which was just them calling our traffic group manager for any of that information. So that's primarily the stakeholders as well as the customers for the app.
All right.
Yeah, for us in North Carolina, our stakeholder base is kind of interesting, because when the project started, it was out of our environmental analysis unit, where they had been given a grant to basically capture a lot of data as part of the project delivery process. But in reality, when they went through the process of building and constructing the applications, the one application that takes data in, they also wanted to have a project manager bent on it. And so we ended up bringing in an additional group of stakeholders over time, who are the actual project delivery leads, who are more of an engineering type. So we started with a lot of environmental folks doing reporting and permitting, and we've moved into the most important part of the application now, from the business perspective, is that intake of data in a standardized format, and that's managed out of a totally different group of stakeholders. So it's not always the people you start with.
Interesting. All right, next question. What led to the decision for this tool or app to be online based or web based?
So in Virginia, the Smart Portal that we use to intake funding applications really replaced an old school, people submitting paper applications, emailing them, dropping them in a Dropbox for our various funding programs. When we developed a objective performance-based planning process with Smart Scale, the number of kind of evaluation scoring processes that we did, where we evaluate congestion relief and safety analysis and environmental buffering, It really required us to be able to overlay a lot of other data, congestion, safety, environmental, land use data, with project location and scope elements, and to assess them for a score that we rank our projects on. So it really required that type of map-based visualization, not only just for the public to see what we were doing, but for us to be able to evaluate the projects for their potential effectiveness.
All right. Let's see. So what resources were identified to assist in the development process? Then, did you have other groups or staff involved in different organizations or agencies that helped out? Staff members in your own group?
Yeah, in North Carolina with the Atlas application, we actually had a variety of different folks involved. We had partner agencies who helped us with data development, and that's everybody from our environmental quality to our gosh, it was so wide. Like U.S. Fish and Wildlife was involved. Our Center for Geographic Information Analysis, the CGIA, who provides this data as well. So we had a number of agencies tied to us as far as data goes. For when we run our screenings, they were people who agreed to partner with us and make their data available. And then we have consultants that we employed to help us build the applications. They were identified early on that we didn't have enough staff on board to handle that. And so we went through deciding which kind of staff we would need. So that went from essentially building a staff for the project of around 70 people in the end that were mostly consultants. And we had a significant amount of developer resources. We ended up with 4 developers, about 8 GIS analysts who were helping with the data. And then we had a ton of subject matter experts, which made up the remainder of that crew. And they were mainly focused in their unique subject matter areas, which was whether they were experts in turtles or whether they were experts in human and natural environmental issues. And all those people helped build the requirements around the application and then also identify data needs that were missing or needed to be improved.
Yeah, but Idaho for the applications, specifically this one developed, it's the business unit and the traffic group kind of providing that expertise on what they're trying to say with the data. Our public information and communications group kind of providing feedback on the interface of the application that's going out to the public, as most of us stare at data all day, so it makes sense to us, but it might not make sense to someone on the street. Our IT infrastructure was leveraged a little bit to ensure that the server had sufficient availability so that it could be accessed in a large scale. We, as far as in terms of development, we have very, very few developers at our organization. I think we might be down to 1 right now. So we've managed and tried to stick to more configurable solutions on that. So a lot of it was built and maintained using Esri infrastructure by our GIS team, but our IT group was consulted here and there to ensure that everything would stand up to heightened traffic.
All right. I think some of you guys have already kind of gone into this with the last question, but is anyone hired specifically to manage or develop this tool or app, and you bring in private contractors?
So yeah, in Virginia, we actually ended up engaging with a third-party vendor to support our IT department division, formerly known as Worldview, now GeoDecisions, who I think is supporting a number of transportation organizations. They've been a great partner for the last 7 years that we've been operating the Smart Portal, and it's a collaborative kind of 3-way process between them as our third-party vendor and our IT division providing oversight, and then us on the business side, all working together to keep the thing going throughout the year, deploy new development, perform maintenance, and incorporate new enhancements. So it's definitely been a benefit to have a special organization come in and do this for us, where I think a lot of our in-house GIS experts and our IT developers have a lot more experience in other types of systems.
For us on this, we'd have help. We have an enterprise agreement with Esri that allows us to expend credits on such things, which has been nice because it's fairly flexible. If it's a smaller effort, we don't have to expend the amount of credits, but we can kind of call them in where we need additional support, either in UI, UX development, configuration, or just kind of to advise. And we have another contractor that we've leveraged to do sort of the more project management and business analyst side of things on this. And so we've leveraged those there. But again, most of it was kept pretty configurable as close to possible due to lack of other resources at our organization.
And for us, we had numerous, like I mentioned, contractors. And on the DIT side, for the development side, we had 4 different firms doing application development together in the same pond. Which was really fun to watch them work. Really good communication. They're really professional, and it was really nice to see the whole thing kind of play out. It was surprising. Sometimes you would think, with that many contractors and that many different contracts in the mix, it would be a problem. But for this project, the project managers were excellent, and their level of communication was very high. So it was an example of the fact that you can have multiple firms participating in a major development effort and be successful. So that was kind of a cool thing.
Nice. And this question kind of was covered already as well with the last couple, but I know there was a lot of people that in a few of these applications that had to provide data or provide some oversight. But how many people would you say were involved in creation or implementation of the tool itself?
For Idaho and this one, I'd say for one specific tool, the public information one, and probably about a dozen people overall. For the broader portal and deployment of that, I'd say probably a couple of dozen, including contractors, IT staff, comms, and obviously not all involved to the same degree, but I'd say probably a couple of dozen, 20 to 30 folks.
About the same here.
Yeah, I think in Virginia we probably had a dozen, maybe a little more involved in the initial implementation that were really in it day to day. I think like at this time though, really implementing new functionality, we're probably several dozen across the state that are really involved in augmenting and supplementing portal development.
Okay. Where did the funding come from your apps?
So in Virginia, we actually have a relatively, for Virginia VDOT, we have a relatively large IT budget, although we can always use more. Most of the funding for our portal comes from our overhead. So as we collect revenues in the state, that gets divvied out to different agencies, especially for transportation. We take some money off the top, obviously, to keep the lights on. And so the majority of funding to support both maintenance and new development comes out of our overhead and our IT budget. We don't use any special grants at this time or third-party funding to keep it going.
Here at Idaho, our funding is mainly as a GIS group is provided from Fed dollars because we weren't part of our IT infrastructure, our IT group until 2 years ago. So we're kind of a mixed bag there in terms of that, and then some additional line item funding from the legislature here and there on some of these things.
For us, the initial funding was through a grant, which basically the majority of it went to data development with, probably between $500,000 to $1 million on the application side. And then they've received additional funding out of the state budget to continue the applications development. And then as the application went from initial development into O&M and enhancements, the staff that was on the contracting side, some of that was added to regular state staff, and so that became absorbed into the budget for the IT unit. So it's a mix of funding now.
Okay. All different. Was there any industry-specific software used that also provided technical support and/or assistance? I know we all pretty much use Esri, but was there anything else, any other specific software that you guys had to incorporate into the tool to make it work?
A major player for us of recently has been Safe Software's FME, which is our feature manipulation engine, which, while it really doesn't necessarily, we could still deliver the applications we have with a more manual process. It's allowed us to automate a lot of that data integration and make it a lot more regular. And that's kind of been a key player of late across many of the applications we've developed, because instead of having to do it all ourselves manually or running Python scripts that kept breaking, we can create processes that run nightly, weekly, monthly, et cetera, to generate that data. And Safe has been good at providing support to a limited degree. They're a smaller company than Esri, but they've been very responsive when we've had issues and stuff.
Okay, great. Could you give an example of a development issue you experienced and how it was overcome? I know most situations, whenever you're developing something, there's always some sort of issue that was unforeseen, and you got to work through it. Could you give an example of one of those?
For North Carolina, when we were working through, we had two major issues that we had to conquer that are pretty easily described. One was communication with the state's identity provider. We use something called NCID, and there's a communication that goes back and forth between that identity provider and the application itself. So when you log in, you need to be kicked over to the identity provider, given a cookie essentially, and brought back. It was something that hadn't been done before, and so there was a lot of communication between two IT entities that really hadn't interacted a lot to that point. And so we had to essentially open up another door of communication with them, have regular meetings to understand how the authentication was going to work. That was quite a challenge for us, and in the end, it came down to some really excellent collaboration between the two teams to do it, and some time spent understanding how that communication would start. We use a program called Shibboleth that sits in IIS that transfers the user across and then brings the cookie back, and then we pass that through. So that was one way we handled it. The other one, which was not so easily overcome, was the initial sizing of the application based on the screening that we work on. So when we screen data, we can screen up to 170 layers simultaneously of varying sizes, and they're all coming over the internet with varying different levels of response. So it's quite challenging to get the sizing right. And then we also host a tremendous amount of information internally. And so there's a lot of demands that go around that. So we had to go through a tremendous amount of testing and using a software called New Relic to understand which layers were being served externally and which ones internally served, which were causing us some of the challenges, and then how to size the servers accordingly in our lower stages before getting to production. So it's probably two examples from us that are pretty indicative of things that many folks probably have to go through.
Very interesting. All right. So we'll move on to implementation questions.
Jeremy, can I jump in with a couple questions from the chat real quick here?
Absolutely.
All right, so going back to one of the questions about the decision for a web-based application, curious what benefits does a web platform have over a desktop-only platform for GIS-based applications?
I'll say for VDOT, the decision to use a web-based versus a kind of a desktop-only application was less about being a GIS application and more just the way our governance is set up with external usage. And having a web-based platform allowed us to credential users and our target audience a lot easier. Gives pretty much every access. Once we set up, we have kind of an organizational structure where we give every local government and other organizations kind of their own account within the portal, and then we set them up with their own kind of admin for their organization. Then they can add users, add delete users as they see fit, and it really made that experience a lot easier when we do it inside of our firewall with desktop only applications. It's really got to sit like on our intranet, and credentialing external users is kind of a pain for us. So that was a no-brainer for us to go with the web-based platform that was outward facing.
Same here with Idaho. It's a lot easier to grant access, and it empowers us as a GIS team to grant access instead of having to go through multiple layers of security and a fingerprint process that is required for users to grant internal access. It's a no-brainer for us, and not that we don't like cooperating with other entities in our organization, but that can slow development time massively, slow down access, and just kind of really bottleneck things as it has in the past. So web-based has really been a lot more potent for a lot of that.
For us, it would be the ability to provide a more generalized answer to the same question that a lot of folks ask. Like when we end up in the desktop world, things become very tailored. And so with the web-based tools, we're able to answer questions across a wider swath with the same tool set. That's sort of the reason why it speaks to us with what we're doing.
Great. And then one more, how do you go about making sure that as new needs on the web-based app or tool arise, that you have the data you need to respond to these new needs?
For us, a lot of that's done in requirements analysis. When the first request comes in, someone will say, well, I want to do this. Then we go through the full requirements with the business analysis effort to figure out what data we have that can actually support the answer to that question. And then we develop some sort of gap analysis, see what we need to add, and then go through the steps to actually create that data, or whether that's bringing a consultant on board or some subject matter experts to create it. That's really how we go about it. We don't build anything that doesn't have the support under it. So like we go through all that effort first before starting to write any lines of code.
Yeah, I'd say planning at the beginning, and then also having a both formalized and informalized relationship with the business if needs change for any of that data. Sometimes we will write up a service level agreement for the business so that they know the expectations to let us know if data or schema or other things change on their end or needs change. And then just also, I think the key has been sort of that informal relationship and the business knowing that they can come and talk to one of us and, work there just to respond a little bit more quickly and less formally.
Great. Thanks, guys. All right, and now we'll move on to the implementation side of the discussion. So who is responsible for approving the work and signing off of the final project? Once you've got the dev done, who decides that it's ready for the final product?
So at VDOT, our governance structure sits as follows. We typically have sponsors or system owners for all of our system applications that are in our inventory, followed by product owners, which is my role, and then data owners, and then our IT support. So we do a 4 release per year schedule with a 2-year product backlog, and so we're constantly moving things through different stage gates and development releases. As we go through each scheduled release, we do about a 2-week testing period, followed by a week UAT that involves us as the ownership of the application with a predetermined UAT collective. And once we make sure there are no bugs or errors, then we sign off on release to production. So it's really a few people that really have that say. Normally it's just our vendor and our IT sending me an email and saying, Jason, you good? Yep, I'm good. So it does make things a lot easier that way. We don't have to go to a committee or any sort of steering committee group to kind of get that sign off.
For us, I think Idaho, it depends on the scale of it. I think for most of the smaller items that are maybe more business focused, it's typically approved by a mid-level manager or data owner who sits over that, typically, as those in sort of the higher executive don't necessarily have the insight into that. It does go through, a testing phase before it is signed off and then it's put out there. But it can vary a lot depending on the scale of it, as there could be a group involved. It could just be similar to what was previously mentioned, just us, working with our IT department and our business owners more indirectly and informally to deliver something with a quicker turnaround than a lot of our more major projects, which can really get bogged down in a governance funnel that goes nowhere for years.
Great. All right. So what was the timeline like for development versus implementation? Jason, I think your mic's messing up on you again.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'll just go ahead and talk. When we initially rolled out the Smart Portal application, it was probably from inception to initial product about a year, which was amazing. They had a couple $100,000 to throw something together and make sure executive management liked it. At this point in time, we're on kind of a rolling 2-year project basis from our contract model. So we plan out 8 to 9 releases over a 2-year period. And each release is about 3 months worth of development time, and then we go to a new release, new version of the Smart Portal, and we just kind of keep that going. We've had that dynamic for the last 6 years, and we just got a new administration, so that may change, but that's how we've been working, and it works for us.
Idaho here, I think it does depend. As I've mentioned previously, we do try to stick towards more the configurable end of things because we are really lacking in development resources at our side. So if it's something that can be done configurably, we typically lean towards that and go through a process that might take I'd say around 3 months average per some of the sub applications for business owners. If it's something that does require more development resources, either from a contractor, Esri, or another vendor, that can be more up to 6 months or so in terms of timeline to go from inception to testing and finally into implementation.
Yeah, for us, the development time frame was probably around, I guess you'd probably say about 9 months for the initial cut of the applications, and then the actual implementation time, once we had kind of gotten through that development, was it's usually relatively short once you get to the actual implementation phase of putting it in play in production, because a lot of it's ironed out in the kinks on the lower stages. But I think more importantly, we're kind of in a quarterly release cycle now. So if you are looking you figure you've got 4 releases per year of the application suite. If we're going to put a new feature into play, how that plays out now is you usually have to do the business analysis work 2 quarters ahead of time. So you're looking at, if you wanted to put something out in quarter 3 of the year, you want to have your business analysis working, the initial work kind of started in quarter 1. And then in quarter 2, you're kind of tying that off, getting the documentation squared away, business requirements, kind of built all the way out, so that the work can start towards the end of quarter 2, and then fully put into play by the end of quarter 3 and out in production by the end.
All right, thanks. So what support, training or documentation, did you need to provide to the users to access this tool or app?
For us, we have a full suite of training that's done by the business. So they offer either ad hoc training, monthly training, and then new updates every time there's a new release that happens. So if we release one of those 4 quarters throughout the year, soon after the release, within a couple of weeks, there's a 1-hour webinar that they host to describe the new changes. IT isn't involved; it's all managed from the business side. And they update their documentation accordingly. They make a recording of the video of the training, the webinar, and then provide that as a video to the business. When you're going to be a completely new user, there's a 4-hour training class they offer that walks the users through all 3 public-facing applications and how to use them. And then there's a helpline that we actually have that is available for users to email or call if they need assistance.
At Idaho, typically training videos are our main way to go, just from a resource perspective. If it's a new application, while in development, we'll typically do a meeting or something close to a webinar that we'll also record for that to guide business users through it. And then pretty much everything else is typically done, I'd say, more informally through just us being a point of contact and people reaching out and us doing a screen share or something to guide them through.
All right. So during the development and implementation phase, who were the biggest supporters of the application? Who was driving it, to get it done? Who was behind the scenes, kind of making sure everything was in order?
So in Virginia, our application really started from our Secretary of Transportation level at the time when this kicked off in 2014. And now I would say, the sub element of the Secretary's office still works with us closely to make sure that our smart portal is, a valuable tool for our external community. At this time, internally, it's really, a team, about a half dozen of us that support our capital program that really make sure that the portal, serves business needs throughout the year and through discrete time frames when heavy external usage is present. So it's probably about 6 people now that really keep it going.
All right.
I'd say our supporters, again, mostly mid-level data management and data owners. And a lot of times they have the ear of executive management or higher leadership in the organization to kind of advocate us overall. But typically for, individual apps or the actual use of it, it'll be those data owners that are our strongest advocates.
All right, thanks. So I think all 3 of you guys have kind of different setups for how your applications work. Where does the application itself currently sit? Is it, internally on GIS servers, or is it through state DOT IT servers or statewide IT, or are you operating mainly on the cloud? Yeah, what is it?
So in Virginia, we leverage an Azure database that's actually within our IT's inventory of applications. So it does sit inside of, air quotes, our firewall, not on a public server. So that can be a blessing in a disguise from a security profile standpoint. That's helped us avoid some bad catastrophes, but from some data integrations with maybe other systems and stuff, that presents its own unique challenges trying to go through the IT governance structure to get new data feeds from other systems and integrate data across different platforms. So we kind of give and take with that dynamic.
At Idaho, we have mostly in-house to our organization Windows virtual machines and those servers that sort of support everything we do for multiple GIS applications. So it's our own servers.
Okay.
Same here in North Carolina. It's all on virtual machines, and then they're all managed through the GIS unit. And we do have a lot of interaction with our IT for firewalls. And like I said, there's some external folks we work with for authorization and authentication.
All right, great, thanks. So we'll move on to some maintenance and recruitment questions. So for maintaining the app, is there a budget allocation to keeping the tool or app running?
At Idaho, it falls mostly under we have a standard amount of funds for just keeping the lights on sort of thing, and it falls under that, but there isn't specific funding allocated to it.
In North Carolina, we have, like I said, it was maybe not super clear earlier, there's split funding. There's funding for like O&M that is just, like was previously mentioned, keeping the lights on, like the servers running, IS functioning correctly, things like that are just generally paid for out of our fund for the unit. And we've had people added to the unit to support the applications, but then specific funding for maintenance and development work that's outside of the norm, where we have contracts involved, that funding comes from the business side, and we actually build a business back from the IT side through a cost center. And so we will put people's time essentially on a cost center, and that money gets deducted to pay for our staff from that side.
So in Virginia, the business support, we all have our own separate dedicated overhead, where my salary, other people's comes out of our individual units. For the application itself, we operate a 2-year fixed contract with our third-party vendor that gets allocated out of our IT budget for the department. And that includes both O&M for the application as well as new development. And everything we do, whether it's tech debt on the application or new enhancements, is just planned out in one product backlog that we just maintain over the course of that 2-year fixed contract, and we just re-up that every 2 years.
All right. I know since a lot of you guys are working on quarterly timelines or some sort of annual refresh, how much work is involved in maintaining that? How much work is involved in refreshing the data every quarter or bringing new data in?
For us, it'll keep one person full-time on metadata. It'll keep one developer busy, consultant resource per year full-time, one full-time business analyst on the IT side as well. So that's 3 people on the IT side that are full-time, always on it. And there's a manager that sits above that's vacant right now. If you're interested in moving to North Carolina, it's advertised, who sort of like runs management on that. But then from the consultant side, from the business side, they actually have a much bigger team involved in currently working on the applications. And that side probably has a good 10 people full-time on generating new requirements, exploring new opportunities for data, business process analysis and modifications. And a lot of that work translates into configuration changes for the application that is done through our administrative tools. So IT doesn't have a whole lot of work to do since we've already built the ability to configure the applications, but the business has to constantly improve the content within the app using the administrative tools to do that work.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. We probably have a very similar dynamic to what was described as far as full-time dedicated IT staff is probably in the 3 to 4 range. It's really on the business side that we have the heavy staff, probably on a seasonal basis as different usage times comes up with our application, and maybe 3 to 4 additional business users spending maybe a third of each week dedicated to different items related to upkeep or new enhancements for the portal.
I'd say a few people, it's kind of a shared responsibility on our side and the business's side. So I don't know how that would translate over to full time, but it's kind of a shared responsibility among the GIS team for maintaining a lot of that, as far as those applications go, and then depends on the individual business users, and their degree of involvement can vary from heavy to none at all, depending on which specific sort of sub-application that we're talking about within the broader framework.
Okay. And I think you guys pretty much led into this next question, what kind of resources are dedicated. You kind of described that pretty well, unless you have anything else you want to add for this question. We'll just move on to the next one. How or when would you decide to improve or update this tool or app?
So in Virginia, that's an easy answer for us. It's when the legislature makes a new law. And normally we have things internally. We get feedback from our user community, feedback from internal users on enhancing navigation and functionality. When we go to lay out our contract over a 2-year period, we're kind of pigeonholing work over a 2-year frame, even if it's just conceptual in nature, and refining that as we get closer to each scheduled release. But typically, since ours is related to funding applications for road and highway and other transportation projects, we are very bound by what the legislature or other appointed leaders decide. Hey, we want to do this now. So sometimes that can depth charge our plans internally or augment them. So that is a driving force for us.
For us, it's the quarterly release schedule. We have never had a release where there wasn't something that needed to be done on the applications. And so what we normally do is decide how much we're going to do, depending on what's happening. So if there's a major, JavaScript update that needs to occur with Esri's tool set to allow us to do something, or something has been deprecated, we'll go through that sort of maintenance phase. If the work from the business side is light for that release, if the business work is heavy, we'll then schedule that in an additional quarter, kind of get that laid out there. But yeah, pretty much there's always a request from our business partners to get something new in the applications.
Yeah, same at Idaho. I think it's to be simple about it, it's either when we can, either from a funding or resource perspective, or when stuff breaks. So that's probably when we update most of these apps.
Cool. All right, thanks a lot. So we have one more question, and I just want to remind everybody, if they have any additional questions in the audience that you'd like to give, please enter them in the chat window and we'll relay them to our panel. The final question is basically, do you have any other advice or wisdom to share that we haven't gone over yet in the panel discussion?
I think from an advice perspective, if you're looking to work with web applications, or you're trying to just build essentially any application, I know that was mentioned earlier by either Jason or Will, but having a really good business side relationship is kind of key. Someone over on that side who is a decision maker, working with someone on the IT side who is also a decision maker, that they can speak frankly to one another and have a really good interaction, that the phone can be picked up at any time. Fostering that is essential to making sure that things run smoothly. There's times when you just need to be frank and you need to say, hey, I'm not going to get this done on time for X reason, or hey, we want to add this thing in here, we think it'll benefit you for this reason. Those kind of things are essential. And then also to be realistic about timelines and the reason for the timelines. Sometimes people can get wrapped around the axle for figuring that they need something in on a particular date just because that's important in their mind, but it might not be necessarily realistic or important to the true stakeholder. And so sometimes it's better to get a feature correct rather than rush it, just because someone may or may not feel that they are pressured to do so. So having that relationship where you can speak frankly about those timelines is also real important.
I think my biggest lesson sitting from the business side, seeing both the feedback I've seen from my IT counterparts with other business users, is as new business users come on, I think it's really imperative to take some time up front and really explain, almost do a boot camp, if you will, of the functionality that your application offers and what types of GIS capability we have with the system. I think it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It really saves a lot of time in requirements gathering, miscommunication down the road to what was just said about deadlines. Really give them, pull back the cover, show them what the system can do, show them the guts of the system and what the GIS-based system looks like. It's going to get people in a common vernacular as you continue to go through different releases. And that is something that I wish we had done 6 years sooner, and that we're really doing with new business users as they come on.
Right.
Yeah, just piggyback on that. I think it's key to have those sort of I don't want to say entirely informal relationships, but very close working relationships with business units so that you can, understand their needs, and they might think about you and GIS and the potential before they go off and, try to do something through another path. So having that, maintaining the ones you have and then building new ones with folks as they come in is key, because, we've had experiences where we'll spend, let's say, $100,000 developing something, even with the working with business stakeholder, and then it will get pushed to prod, and then it'll never get used. And we've had that happen a frustrating number of times, and it's typically in those cases where we don't really have as close of a working relationship with that business unit. So just being close, keeping your friends close on that sort of thing.
All right, great. Okay, I don't know if there's any more questions. Kyle, has anything else came in?
No more questions in the chat.
All right. Well, with that, that's all the topics we have for today. I would like to thank Eric, Jason, and Will for their participation today and their willingness to chat. Our next webinar will be on March 3rd, 2022, and we hope to see you there. And once again, if you're interested in being a part of the steering committee, you can reach out to Kyler or myself, and we'd be happy to have you come on board. With that, I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you later.
Hey, thank y'all.
Thank you, everyone.